أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. مثل الذين ينفقون أموالهم في سبيل الله كمثل حبة أنبتت 7 سنابل في كل سنبلة 100 حبة والله يضاعف لمن يشاء والله واسع عليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. The topic of these discussions has been rights within the religion of Islam. We've spoken about the historical basis for rights, the philosophical basis for rights, the Islamic approach to rights and duties and responsibilities, and we started to look at some of the rights of ibadah and the rights of acts that we use to fulfill Allah's greatest right. And now we will start to begin to transition from the rights of ibadah over to the rights of actions to other of God's creations, to other people. But the right of charity, it straddles both, because it is both a form of ibadah, a form of worship, and it is also a way in which we respect other people's rights, because we're talking about the rights of the poor. And the first fact to establish whenever we discuss charity within an Islamic context is to understand that our wealth does not belong to us. If our bodies, if our nafs, as we spoke when we were talking about the rights of the body, if even the nafs is not our own, if even our jasad, our physical bodies don't belong to us, what about our money? We read in the Holy Quran, Surah Hadid, verse number 7. آمنوا بالله ورسوله وأنفقوا مما جعلكم مستخلفين فيه فالذين آمنوا منكم وأنفقوا لهم أجر كبير. Believe in God and believe in His Messenger and give out from what He has made pass down to you. Those of you who believe and give will have a great reward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He is giving His rizq, He's making sure that we don't forget that it is connected to God. That is why one of His names is Ar-Raziq. Similarly, in Surah Dhariyat, verse number 58, we read, وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. Allah explicitly states, unequivocally in verse 58, and in their wealth, the beggar and the outcast, they have a haqq, they have a right, they have a claim. So the money that we have, it in part belongs to the poor. It belongs to the way in which we're supposed to spend it for God. And Islam, it is committed wholeheartedly to financial fairness. But when it comes to financial fair play, and when we look at the landscape, there tend to be two extreme approaches. One group of people will look at the degree of inequality of wealth, and they will conclude that no, we need equality of outcome. We need everybody to have the same amount of wealth. And you have ideologies, particularly like communism, born. But such ideologies, they're based on paper. That's one of the great criticisms of Marx. That it is based on paper and ignores entirely the human psychology and condition. And when it is employed around the world, we find in the 20th century, more than 100 million are dead as a result of what was supposed to be, at least on the surface, a compassionate ideology. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have unchecked capitalism, whereby people are free to make as much money as they like. They garner as much influence as they can, with as few safeguards as possible, and then you end up with situations like 1% of the world owning more than 50% of the wealth. And both systems, from an Islamic perspective, there is a critique to be had. So Islamically, we are obliged to give to the poor, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear, and through the rules of Islam, we're supposed to give voluntarily. We give from our earnings because we are told to do so. But there's not mass engineering on a grand scale. And before we talk about charity as well, it's essential to appreciate that Islam, it's not an anti-wealth religion. There's no claim that you can't earn money or that you can't take part in this world, because that's a common trope that we sometimes fall under. In Surah Al-Qasas, verse 77, we read, وَابْتَغِي فِي مَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةِ وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Seek the life of the world to come, of the akhirah, of what Allah has granted to you. But do not neglect your share in this world. Do good to others as God has done good to you. Do not spread corruption in the land, for Allah does not love those who do this. Our life in this world, our participation, being a useful, productive member of society, it is part of our religion. To try and build the institutions around us, to contribute and to give more than we take. There was a man who approached Imam al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. When he was tilling the fields, and it was a particularly hot day, and the Imam was he was physically exerting himself. So this man, he was a good man, he was a companion of the Imam, he goes up to him and he says, "Oh Imam, this is not befitting someone of your rank and your station. You are one of the leaders of Quraysh. How is it that you go out and earn your money in this way? What would you say to Allah if you died in this situation?" And Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, he responded starkly. He said, "Were I to die right now, I would die a martyr in the way of Allah. Because I will die in earning a halal income for my family in order that I may protect them from you and from society. So that we earn enough money to look after our dependents so that they don't have to go to other people to ask for help. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone has their own challenges. It's not that asking for help is inherently wrong. But as far as we can, as per the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt and as per the injunction of the Holy Quran, we try and earn our right. And this is part of ibadah. Sometimes when we go to work on a day-to-day basis, we can get disheartened because you see the mountains of paperwork and you feel like you're doing the same mundane thing over and over again. And you can feel like you're being lost in it. But Islamically, if you are providing for your family, there's a renewed sense of understanding for what appears to be mundane. That it becomes a ibadah if we're earning a halal income. And so that gives us that extra motivation and joy when we're working. It's part of the many side benefits of the religion of Islam. But having said that, with money there comes responsibility. There is a verse in the Holy Quran which pulls no punches. Surah At-Tawbah, verses number 34 to 5. And those who hoard gold and silver and do not spend it in the cause of God, give them news of a painful retribution. On the day of judgment, it will be heated up in the fire of hell, and it will be used to brand their foreheads and their sides and their backs. And they will be told, this is what you hoarded up for yourselves. Now feel the pain of what you hoarded. And for those that approach this verse, there's some verses of the Quran which can be quite graphic. And they say, oh, this is a little bit harsh, isn't it? Not at all. Not when you compare it to how egregious a sin hoarding can be. When you look at people who starve or who can't give medicine to their kids, there are so many children that die from preventable diseases simply because they can't afford the medicine for them. How tragic is that? And that is in large part because of these kinds of people who see money as belonging not to God, not to some higher purpose, but simply for their own desires. And with wealth that we have, we do shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with every blessing there comes responsibility. There's an old parable that once there was a king who wanted to know what happened after we died. And he got so obsessed with this question that he said to his kingdom, his entire subjects, he said, anyone who can give me an answer to this question, I will give you my whole kingdom. And so there was a poor man who owned nothing but a donkey. And he came up to the king and he said, I will fulfill this mission because what do I have to lose? I'll risk it all. So that night he goes to the graveyard and he sleeps inside the grave. And he says, I'll meet you all in the morning. He goes to sleep. Soon afterwards, he wakes up and he is accosted rudely by some angels. And they say to him, O owner of the donkey, on this day was your donkey thirsty and did you not give it water? And he didn't. He was punished. And the angel said, O owner of the donkey, on this day did you not overburden it, knowing that you were overburdening it? And he said, yes, I did. And he was punished for it. Question after question after question for the whole night. And then he wakes up in the morning. The royal entourage is outside the grave. The king is there, his advisors, the horses, the soldiers, and they're waiting eagerly for the man to wake up. As soon as his eyes open, he runs for the hills. And the king and his men, they don't understand what happened, what's going on. So they chase after him. Eventually they catch him. And they said to him, look, you've done it. You clearly have the answer. Just tell me so that I can give you my entire kingdom. And the man said, I couldn't even take responsibility for my donkey. I would be mad to take your kingdom. With every piece of wealth we have, there is responsibility. And we will be accountable for that. If we're spending it in the right way, we're paying our zakat, our khums, and we're not doing israf, we're not excessively spending, we can be happy with that. But it comes with a warning label. And some people, when it comes to charity, they can be quite cynical. More so with charity than other acts. Because charity, it hurts sometimes, especially when you don't want to give it, to see your money go away. So they ask, can Allah not feed the poor? Can Allah not give them money? And from an Islamic outlook, anyone asking this within an Islamic context is clearly asking the question with impure intentions. Because you could apply the same logic to a lot of different aspects of life. Why take your children to hospital, right, if they're unwell? Surely God is the one who can cure. Why oppose a despot? Surely God can depose him. Why do anything at all? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do it better. The logic, it breaks down, reductio ad absurdum. And in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He introduces us to the idea of wasilas, of routes that He uses, means that He uses to send His blessings to His creation. For example, in Surah Duha, verse number 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى, that we found you poor and we made you rich, we made you self-sufficient. Who was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referring to here? He's talking to the Holy Prophet, who originally was not from a rich background, and he was given wealth. How? Through Bibi Khadija. Bibi Khadija was his wasila. It was the way in which Allah sent the Holy Prophet wealth. Rasulullah didn't wake up one day and find that there was a mountain of gold outside his house. That's not how it works. That's not how the fabric of this world works anyway. Perhaps in the akhirah, who knows? And thirdly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He tells us to give charity, it's an opportunity. It's a golden opportunity for us to build the good deeds, to add to the scrolls of the right angel. And the paucity of charity is one of the great regrets that people will have on the Day of Judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Munafiqun, verse 10, give out of what we have provided for you. Again and again, Allah says, give out of what we have provided. He reminds us over and over again, do not become selfish when it comes to your wealth. Before death comes to you, and one of you says, لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب فأصدق وأكن من الصالحين. If only I could have a little bit more time, I would give in charity and be one of the righteous. If only. How great that on the Day of Judgment, when people are regretting that they didn't do more, what's the first deed they wish they could have done more of? Giving charity. And when we give charity, it only increases sustenance. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he says in Bahar al-Anwar that everything has a key, and the key to sustenance is charity. When we give away money in God's way, it will increase our worldly wealth as well. He also says in Bahar al-Anwar, cure your sick by giving sadaqah, by giving charity. Remove troubles by giving charity. Increase your sustenance by giving charity. Charity banishes 70 shaitans from what is within one's beard. And charity goes into the hand of Allah before it goes into the hand of the needy. There's a beautiful analogy, and we'll come back to that as we go along. And one of the ways to facilitate this, especially when we look at the way that habits are formed, is to make it easy. Because sometimes we want to give charity, but for some reason we forget, or we don't quite get round to it, or we can't find the change or the place to put it. Whatever small excuses, shaitan pounces upon. When someone's about to give charity, shaitan whispers 70 times in his ear. So one way we can approach it is have a simple system. For example, you can have 2 jars, one full of change, that you just have spare change from grocery shopping or whatever, and every time you see it, or once a day, pick up any amount. If it's 10p even, if it's 5p, whatever it is, put it in the other jar, which is for sadaqah. And then you can keep doing that over and over, anything that makes it easy. So what does Imam as-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, what does he say about the rights of charity? He says in the Risalatul Huquq, which has been the spine of these talks, the right of charity, of sadaqah, is that you know it is a storing away with your Lord, a deposit for which you need no witnesses. If you deposit in secret, you will be more confident than if you deposit in public. You should know that it repels afflictions and illnesses from you in this world, and it will repel the fire from the next. A lot of different dimensions of charity Imam introduces us to here when he's talking about the rights of charity. The first is to change the way in which we think about charity. One way that we erroneously think about charity is that it belongs to me and I'm giving some of my wealth to other people. Wrong. Another way that we think about charity is that we're taking our money and we are losing it, we're giving it away. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says no. When you give charity, you are investing in the Almighty. You're investing in God. And that is the greatest of all investments. He says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 261, those who spend their wealth, the verse that I recited at the beginning, those who spend their wealth in God's cause are like grains of corn that produce 7 ears, each producing 100 grains. God gives multiple fold increase to whoever He wishes. He is limitless and all-knowing. It's a wonderful analogy here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, when you give charity, it is like you are planting a seed, you are planting corn. And from that sprouts a plant, and from that how many kernels? It is an exponential increase, times 7, times by 100, and then each of those kernels too can be planted. And that exponential growth, it continues. In Surah Al-Hadid, verse number 11, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ وَلَهُ أَجْرٌ كَرِيمٌ. Who is it that will offer to Allah a good loan that He will double it for him and he will have an excellent reward? We have savings, we have a certain amount of money, and we think, what's the best way that I can invest this money? Perhaps we can look towards index funds, right? People, they make all these calculations all the time. 7% returns annually. That's probably a good benchmark for what you're going to get. Small amounts, and we hope over time that the money will increase over however many years. That's the way some financial gurus, they advise you. People invest in property. They want capital gains. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whatever investment opportunity you think you have, I have one better for you. I will give you much more of a return on whatever you give to me, whatever you put in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam, he goes on to say, in Wasalat al-Huquq, if you deposit it in secret, you will be more confident than if you deposited it in public. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he advises us to give in secret two of the most beautiful verses in the Quran on charity. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 264. O you who believe, do not cancel out your charitable deeds with reminders or hurtful words. Like someone who spends his wealth only to be seen by the people, he does not believe in Allah, he does not believe in the last day. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to try and keep our charity secret, not to be like those who give charity and then insult the person we give charity to, that we look down upon them, or we do ghiba on them, or that we give to them and then we remind them to say, oh, do you remember that time I gave you that much money? Unacceptable. You lose the reward. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he goes on for a beautiful analogy here. He says, such a person is like a rock with some soil, some earth on it. You can probably imagine the kind of rocks outside that have a little film of moss on them. And when you look at them, it seems, okay, there's life. There's some sort of growth there. But as soon as heavy rain falls on it, it leaves the rock completely bare. Such people get no rewards from their works. Allah does not guide those who disbelieve, who deliberately disbelieve, let's say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he draws this analogy. Why? Because number one, the person who gives in order to please others is shallow. Hence there is a shallow layer of soil. That we need other people's gratification in order to feel good about ourselves. We don't have security in our own deeds. We also have an impure intention. We have what appears to be a good deed, but we have sullied it with bad actions afterwards. We seek reward from man rather than from God. And that appreciation, when they say thank you, when they appreciate it, for those brief few moments, that becomes our reward. And that's not an investment that is worthwhile. That's not something that we get a huge amount from. And when any difficulty comes their way, any trial or tribulation, and he uses the analogy of heavy rain here, what happens? They crumble like a house of cards. As soon as tribulation comes their way, we say, Ya Allah, we used to give in your way. What's happened to us? Why are we afflicted with poverty? They begin to question, they begin to doubt. And then Allah, in the next verse, he has a beautiful contrasting analogy as well. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 265, he says, but those who spend their wealth in order to gain Allah's approval as an affirmation for their own faith are like a garden on a hill. When heavy rain falls upon it, it produces double the yield. And if no rain falls, it will take sustenance from the dew. Solid foundations, how we can compare the thin layer of soil to the deep layer upon the hill. It's not just on flat ground, on a hill. The roots go down deep. There is solidity when we root ourselves in Allah Almighty, the unchanging, the consistent, the all-powerful, the benevolent. On top of that, regardless of what difficulty comes our way, whether it is ease, whether it's difficulty, whatever challenge it is, we fall back on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no fickleness to our person. We are productive. We produce beautiful things. Unlike the moss on the stone. And it is beautiful not just to ourselves, but also to other people. When you think of some sort of utopian landscape, if you imagine a place of complete peace, what do you tend to imagine? You tend to imagine, amongst other things, rivers, flowers, grass, hills. And that kind of serenity Allah is passively putting into this verse. You become a source of serenity for yourself and for others. And whether you think you're appreciated or not, it doesn't matter. Because you've left compensation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was the charity of Ahlul Bayt. When we look at Imam as-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, when he used to give charity, we read in Bahar al-Anwar, that he would go out in the darkness of the night and he would cover his face twofold, two coverings, the darkness of night and a physical veil, and he would knock on the doors of the poor and he would give them any sustenance that they needed. Because he wanted to do it in private so that there was no, number one, that they wouldn't feel humiliated, that they were getting from someone, and also that they couldn't give him any credit for it either. And when we give openly, there is a danger sometimes that we can hope for that accolade, for that compliment. But does this mean that we can't give charity openly? Imam, when he talks about the rights of charity, he says that it is better, you're more confident in charity. But he doesn't say not to give openly either. In the Holy Quran, we're actually told to. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 274, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً. Those who give charity in the day and the night, openly or in secret, for them there is a great reward with Allah, they will not grieve. So where's the reconciliation between the two? On the one hand, we're told to give secretly. On the other hand, we're told to give openly. The simple response that the ulama they give is that we try and give charity secretly, especially such that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is giving. So secret even that you keep it secret from yourself. That is the better form of charity, the one that Imam says is one of the rights of charity. But at the same time, there's certain situations where giving charity openly is a good thing. For example, if you're donating to a program and no one's going up, you go forward and you put the money there, people see, okay, that's normal, they're not breaking the mold. It encourages other people to give charity. And in Majmu' al-Bayan, there's a tradition that tells us that obligatory donations of charity, so the zakat and the khums, that should be given openly. Because everybody gives it. You can't really show off by saying, I did the bare minimum. You're not going to get a lot of credit for that. So there's much less chance of any pollution of your intention. And Ahlul Bayt, they gave both. We just read that Imam as-Sajjad, he would give charity in the night. And who could forget when Ali ibn Abi Talib gave his charity whilst he was in ruku'. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Even if his left hand didn't want to know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recorded it in the Holy Quran. And Imam, he goes on to say that when we give charity, we get protection in this world, in Risalatul Huquq. There's a wonderful tradition in Wasa'ul al-Shia that once there was a famine amongst the people of Banu Israel. And the times were so desperate that people were starving to death on the streets. And there was a woman who had a relatively young child who had gone out to get some firewood. And she only had in this whole world one morsel of food to eat. And she was starving, she was very hungry, but she wasn't quite dying. And a man, he came along, he knocked on her door, and he said, I barely have strength to move. I am on the verge of death itself. She had already put the food in her mouth. She reached inside her mouth. She took out the morsel and she gave it to the man. And in doing so, she saved his life. But she did it for what intention? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just after she did that, she heard a shriek coming from near her house, and it was the cry of her young child. And she ran to go and see, and she had found that a wolf had pounced upon her son and had her son inside its mouth. But at that moment, Jibreel came down and took the child out from the mouth of the wolf and gave the child back to this mu'minah. And Jibreel came up to her and said, O bondsmaid, O great servant of Allah, are you now satisfied? A morsel for a morsel. And it can even, giving charity in a worldly sense, it can even stave off death itself. There's a tradition that Nabi Isa alayhi salam, he was told about someone who had newly gotten married. And when he heard the name of the bride, he said, unfortunately, she's going to pass away on her wedding night. And his companions, they were very sad. And the next day they went, probably to give their condolences or to provide some emotional support, because this would be a calamitous event. But lo and behold, when they arrived, she answered the door. She was alive and well. So they went, they said, Ya Isa alayhi salam, what happened? We're not used to inaccuracies from you. Nabi Isa alayhi salam, he was also confused. So he went to the bride and he said, is there anything you did last night? Any act of service you can think of? And she said, I didn't do anything special. He said, just think of anything. And she said, oh, actually there was one thing. Last night, there was a man who came to our house asking for food. And he's a very poor man, a destitute man. He comes every week and we always give to him. So he knows that he can rely on us. But last night, everybody was busy with the wedding festivities. Nobody had the time to go out and give him anything, but I remembered him. And in my bridal attire, I went out and I gave him food. I got up from where I was sitting and I went and I gave him some food. Nabi Isa alayhi salam said, that's it. Show me where you were sitting. They went to where she sat down. There was a pile of clothes next to her. Nabi Isa alayhi salam moved the clothes and a venomous scorpion came out. And he said, that scorpion was destined to kill you, but your act of charity saved your life. And it's say interestingly, in a spiritual sense, because obviously the angel of death was kept at bay, but in a physical sense as well, that she got up physically and that is what protected her. And we continue to get these sort of benefits in a worldly sense. But not just in the world, also the main benefit comes in the akhirah. That it is in Wasa'ul al-Shi'a, for example, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa he says that giving charity in secret, it quenches the wrath of the Lord and wipes out wrongdoings just like water puts out the fire. And it staves off 70 different types of calamities. When we give charity, it extinguishes the fire of our bad deeds. And remember, the fuel of hell, in a slightly more esoteric sense, it comes from the deeds of man. Allah says in the Quran that the fuel of the fire of hell are stones and men. And when we die, it keeps our book of deeds open, particularly when we give sadaqah jariyah. When we give some sort of charity that continues to provide benefit. If we donate to a masjid, for example, and they keep it open. If we donate, for example, anything to a library or books, or we share wisdom, or the best of all sadaqah jariyahs, raising upright, practicing children, then our book of deeds stays open after we die, so that we continue to get that benefit from the charity. But another right of charity is that we make sure that we give the best. We read in Surah Al Imran, verse number 92, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not attain righteousness until you give of that which you love. It is essential that when we give the best that we can. Now, we are often tempted. When we want to give to charity, we find whatever leftovers we have, whatever's remaining at the back of the cupboard, whatever we can just quickly get our hands in to tick the box. And I don't want to undermine that. There's still a lot of barakah in that. But the greater barakah, it comes when we give from something that we desire, that we can benefit from. This is the proverbial story of Habil and Qabil, Cain and Abel, that both were asked to give a sacrifice. Habil gave the best, Qabil gave the worst. It's no wonder that Habil's sacrifice was accepted and Qabil's was rejected. And in giving the best, it's also paramount. Another right of charity is to give it straight away, to give it as quickly as possible. Because otherwise shaitan, he works his machinations. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he says in Kanz al-Ummah, the best charity to give is when one is healthy and covetous, when one has high hopes of livelihood and he fears poverty. Do not wait till you are breathing your last breath to bequeath to others, saying this is for this person, this is for that person, and this is for so and so. That when we give charity, we feel the pain of it going away. That pain, it is a form of tazkiyah, it's a form of purification. Hence that's where the term zakat comes from. That we are purifying the self through that pain. There's a wonderful story about a man, quite a rich man, who had a warehouse full of dates. He had a date trading business. And in his will, after he died, he left in his wasiyah that I want all of these dates to be given to charity. So after he died, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he was the executor of the will. He ensured all of the dates were given out. And people came in droves, they took lots and lots of dates, they distributed them. And after all was said and done, Imam Ali alayhi salam was walking out of the warehouse. And on the floor, he saw there was a date, a small date. It had been trampled upon, it had been stepped on, and it was covered in dirt. He picked it up, he wiped the dirt off from the date. And he said, if that man even gave this one date while he was alive, in the condition that it is now, he would have got more reward than he gave all of these warehouses of dates after his death. And another right of charity is that we treat them as equals. Remember, when we give charity, we're not standing up here saying, okay, you can have something of what I have. We are saying, this is your haqq. I have the opportunity to give to you. This is that I should be grateful to you that you are the destination for me to give it to. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He advises us to give charity by hand into the person who is begging. And when we give it, to ask the faqir to pray for us. Why? It's a beautiful psychological approach. Because when you're giving to the poor, you're not only giving by your own hand, respecting them like that, you're also saying this isn't a unilateral exchange. I give to you, but I also expect back from you. You give them that agency, you give them that worth. There were a group of people that went to the Holy Prophet and they saw that he was surrounded by the poor. Hazrat Abu Dhar, Miqdad, Salman, so on and so forth. And they said, "Oh Rasulullah, we will join you." They were rich, they were richly dressed. And they said, "We will move these malodorous, poorly clad people away from you." And this statement was so repugnant to God that the verse of the Quran came down, Surah Al-Kahf, verse number 28. "And keep your soul, O Prophet, content with those who remember Allah in the morning and the evening, seeking His face, and not let your eyes pass beyond them, seeking the pomp and glitter of this world." And putting this in action, there's a wonderful story in Les Miserables, the famous book by the romantic French author Victor Hugo. And in this book, he paints a character known as Jean Valjean. Now, Jean Valjean, he is at the time of at the start of the novel, he's now a middle-aged man. He has just been released from prison after spending 19 years there. Why? Because he stole a loaf of bread to feed his starving family. And his family, they almost certainly died of starvation. We never find out what happened to them. 19 years. He tried to escape a couple times. That increased his sentence. He comes out of prison now, bitter, defeated, disconsolate, tired, poor, hungry, thirsty, weary. And he walks through the town until he comes to a place where he can stay, an inn. He asks, "Can I stay here?" When they find out he's a criminal, they kick him out. He says, "Can I stay in the stables?" They say, "You can't even stay with our horses." He goes to the jail and he says, "Can I sleep on the floor of your jail?" They said, "Get out of here." Children chase after him, they pelt him with rocks. He knocks on the door of what seems like a kind family, and the man takes out a gun. He then even goes to the kennel of a dog, and he tries to lie down on the straw, and the dog comes and kicks him out. And a passerby heard him say, "I am not even a dog." You can only imagine what his emotional state would be at that time. And then he arrives at the door of one of the most beautiful, one of the most brilliant characters in all of fiction, the Bishop Myriel, the Bishop of Day. And when he asks to stay now, he doesn't sugarcoat it. He's expecting to be kicked out. And he says, "I am a prisoner, I've done this, I've done that, and nobody's giving me anything." And the bishop, he says simply, "Here, by all means, come and eat at my table." He actually gets out the good silverware, he puts the silver candles there, and they get ready for a lavish meal. And Jean Valjean, he's surprised. He says, really? You will keep me here? You won't drive me forth a convict? You call me sir? You address me with respect? You don't say, get out of here, you dog? I am going to sup. I will lie on a mattress. I will have a bed for the first time in 19 years. You can feel his elation and disbelief as the bishop offers him this. And the bishop responds with that concept we mentioned before. He says, this is not my house. This is the house of Christ. And in his Christian theology, he's referring to God. The door doesn't demand who enters has a name, but only if you are hungry, if you are thirsty, if you are needy, then you are welcome. They ate together, they had food, and not once did the bishop say anything about his origin, where he had come from. And the bishop's sister is observing, because we are naturally curious creatures. When we see someone, for example, has shackles, or we see something's going on, something's breaking out, a fracas or something of that description, we always want to know what's happening. We get a bit nosy. We ask questions, even though it is not a polite thing to do. But the bishop doesn't mention anything about that. He doesn't sermonize, he doesn't moralize, he doesn't proselytize. He just talks, treats him like a guest. And the sister observing says, he was thinking no doubt the man whose name is Jean Valjean. He had his misfortune only too vividly present in his mind. The best thing to do would be to divert him from it and make him believe, even if only for a moment, that he was ordinary, that he was a human being. Is this not charity as well? And we'll return to that line shortly. But the following morning, Jean Valjean, he's an escaped convict, he is bitter, and he is so poor. When he wakes up in the morning, he steals all the silver cutlery that was there from the day before. And the sister goes to the bishop and says, Bishop, we've been robbed. The one luxury in this whole world that the bishop kept from himself in his ascetic lifestyle was taken. And the bishop responded, he said, we've been holding on to those too long. They belong to the poor, and clearly he was one of the poor. But after Jean Valjean stole them, he was arrested by the police. How did you get this silver? They dragged him back to the house of the bishop. They come knocking on the door. And they said, oh, bishop, we have found a thief who stole from you. And the bishop, he looks at Jean Valjean, he realizes the situation. And he bends forward, he says, Jean Valjean, my guest, my friend, why did you leave so quickly? I gave you the gift of this silver cutlery, but you left behind the silver candlesticks. So he ran inside the house. He picked up the silver candlesticks and he gave them to him. And the police, they were surprised. They said, oh, he didn't steal them from you. We thought he was making that up. And the priest, he said, no, they were a gift from me. And the police left. And at that point, Jean Valjean, he couldn't say anything. He was on the verge of fainting. And then the bishop, he leaned in and whispered into his ear, Jean Valjean, my brother, you no longer belong to evil but to good. It is your soul I buy from you. I withdraw it from black thoughts and the spirit of perdition, and I give it now to God. Now, did he fulfill his promise to the bishop? Did he manage to take the essence of the charity and use it for good? Inshallah, when you read the book, you'll find out. Now, another right of money, another right of charity, is that it is not just money that we give. What was that line that the sister said? She said, is it not indeed that this is to understand charity well? Even changing the conversation just to make the man feel human was charity. And this is a very Islamic concept. There are people who struggle to give monetary charity because we are not all from very well-off backgrounds. We can struggle. Everybody goes through difficulty in life. And everyone is tested in their own way. And Allah says in Surah Talaq, verse number 7, that let man of means spend according to his means, but the man whose resources are restricted, let him spend according to what Allah has given to him. Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can take. And this is one of the most compassionate verses in the Holy Quran. And there are two layers to the compassion. The first is the obvious one. Allah doesn't burden a soul beyond what it can bear. Profound wisdom in that. But the second, which is so beautiful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that give according to your means. But if you can't, give from what God has given you. What does that mean? It means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could very simply have said, okay, if you're poor, don't give charity. If you don't have money, you don't give. It's logical, it makes sense, and it is compassionate. But Allah is the most compassionate of the compassionate. He says that if you are any Muslim, if you are any human being, you have a responsibility to give charity. He doesn't take away that privilege, even from those who are materially not as well off. The Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he says in Bahar al-Anwar, verily every Muslim must give charity every single day. They said, Ya Rasulullah, how is this possible? How can we give charity every day? Rasulullah responded by saying, if you remove an obstacle from the road, that is sadaqah. If you give someone directions, that is sadaqah. If you visit the sick, that is sadaqah. If you encourage good deeds, that is sadaqah. You forbid bad deeds, that is sadaqah. Even saying wa alaykum as-salam to someone is a form of sadaqah. In another tradition, the Holy Prophet said even smiling is a form of sadaqah. That everyone is included within the injunctions of God. He doesn't want anyone even to feel excluded, even when He's giving them ease. This is the compassion. This is the compassion of God. And when we give charity, we give to anyone who needs. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 272. لَيْسَ عَلَيْكَ هُدَاهُمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. It is not for you, O Prophet, to guide them. Allah guides whoever He wishes. Whatever charity you give benefits your own soul, provided for the sake of God. Whatever you give will be repaid to you in full. In Majmu' al-Bayan, there's a tradition that the Muslims originally, they were very reluctant to give charity to non-Muslims. They said we should only restrict charity to fellow Muslims. And there are forms of charity which are restricted. When we give our zakat and our khums, it is restricted for Islamic purposes. But other charities, they should absolutely be open to anybody who is needy, who is deserving. Ibn Abbas, he says in this tradition that the reason this verse was revealed was because people were reluctant. They didn't want to give charity to non-Muslims, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, it's not your job to guide them. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's job. You do what you can and you leave the rest to Allah. For indeed, as our first Imam said, he who is not your brother in faith is your equal in humanity. Another right of charity is that we give responsibly. That when we are using our own money, we tend to be a little bit careful, right? We make sure that we're spending it in the most efficient way. We try and optimize the way that we're spending. We don't waste it, we don't squander it, because we feel how valuable it is. But when we give charity, remember that hadith from the beginning. The charity goes first into the hand of God before it reaches the poor. When we give charity, that charity is spent in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way. And there is a responsibility to ensure that that charity, at least as far as we can, is going to noble causes. Sometimes we have a temptation, oh, there's an organization that I won't look at it, I won't go into it at all, I'll just give all my money there, ma'as salama, my responsibility is done. But no. Rather, when we give, we try and find the most noble causes. We try and give to those directly who are needy. If we can't give directly, then through trustable people. That we know it's going to the right place, so that we show the same respect to the money directly given to God as we show to the respect of money that we use for ourselves. And the final right of charity for tonight is to ensure that we also give to the dead. There was once an alim who, in a dream, he saw that there were a group of people that were celebrating. They were very happy, but there was an old man who was upset. The scholar, he asks the old man, he says, why is it that you're so upset? He says, because all of these people, they get gifts from their family members, essentially from their sadaqah jariyas. But I have none. I have a son, but he sends me nothing. So when the scholar woke up, he found the son. And the man was a launderer. He was cleaning clothes by the river. And he said to him, look, I met your father, and he's in this condition. And he's asking if you can spare anything. And the man said, look at me. What can I give? I'm poor, I don't have anything. And the scholar said, just anything you can give, just try. So he took a cup, and he scooped up 3 cups of water and threw it on the soil. And he said, I give this with the intention of sadaqah for my father. Menial, right? Nothing, negligible. That night the scholar had a dream and he met the old man. He was very happy. He was elated. Why? He said that my son gave me a gift. But the scholar, he was confused. He said, but all he did was splash a bit of water. But his intention was for charity. He said, yes, but his intention was pure. So when he threw the water on the side of the bank, it fell on top of a fish that was stranded. And the fish was about to die. The cups of water he threw on, it caused the fish to go into the river, and he saved the life of that fish, and now I have the bounty of that act. The old man, out of his joy and jubilation, he begins to pray for his son from his heart in a way that he wasn't praying for before. And the fortunes of his son changed. He got a break. He managed to get a good job, he earned some money, and he became well off in a worldly sense as well. Such is the power of our parents' du'as, even after they have passed away. That door is still open, and we can access it by giving gifts.